Um, so welcome everyone for the first 2022 webinar for month of March. So we plan to do from February, but we couldn't make it, so our apology. But we have lots of activities lined up for everyone. This webinar will happen every third Friday of the month at 12 p.m. between 12 and 1 p.m. Depending on the availability of the speakers, we will have one or two speakers every week, every month. Now, the plan is that whatever topic that we cover in the webinar, we will have a related reading on a monthly reading group. So monthly reading groups will be running between third Friday of every month to the third Friday of the next month. So it won't go like 1st to 30th like that, but it will be posted after the webinar because it is related to, connected to the webinar. So what that means is that we will have a reading posted after 1 p.m. today, and all the ASCII Learning Design Special Interest Group will be getting that notification on the Teams, and you can read. I'll be posting another document which will tell you about how we are thinking we want to run the reading group this month. Because I haven't got any volunteers, I will be running the reading group, but what essentially it is to seek participation from Learning Design Special Interest Group members, and they run that particular any month reading group. So this month I have asked for expression of interest, but probably it is like I haven't given enough time, so so far I haven't got any expression of interest to run this month's reading group. So what you essentially do is you can go in and moderate and facilitate the reading group for that month, and then new month there will be new member coming in and helping, and we have other activities as well. I have given ASCII Learning Design Special Interest Group email on this slide and also Twitter, so please follow us. We also have, apart from webinar and reading group, we are also planning podcast. Now, we are not able to make it to kind of like every month, so we will have it like probably every 2 months. Learning design labs, which will be hands-on work where we as a group sit together, or like on online breakout rooms or whatever that we figure out later. We will be doing hands-on learning design stuff in the learning design labs. And if you have any proposal for research projects, joint projects that we can help you with, we are happy to do that as well. This week we have Kate with us, and he will be talking about the contemporary role of learning designer, ideas and challenges in education and training. Now, let me just briefly tell you about Keith. He's a lecturer in learning design at UTS. He is also Google certified innovator and Apple distinguished educator. He's also Adobe campus leader. So you see lots of technology coming to that introduction. He was a high school teacher, so he has experience in the understanding of the secondary and probably primary, that school learning experience as well. He worked as learning designer for a long time. And Keith, I'm not sure whether you would like me to tell everybody this, that you are a terrible ukulele player.
Do you want me to do a song?
everybody will know that my introduction was correct anyway. I would like Keith to introduce himself more when he start his presentation. Uh, so I will start with recognition of the traditional owner and indigenous culture. On behalf of Learning Design Special Interest Group, ASCILAT, I acknowledge the traditional owner of the land on which we are meeting. I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to mention that Leanne, who is a co-lead for Learning Design Special Interest Group, couldn't be here. And she sends her apology to everyone, and she will join us from next month. So over to you, Keith.
Awesome. And I'll just share my screen. Here we go. All right. There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am really looking forward to having a bit of a chat to you about what I see as the contemporary role of the learning designer. I am, of course, joking about the ukulele. I will definitely not be practicing any songs on you this afternoon. Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction, Kashmira, and thank you for the invitation to have a chat to you. I am certainly by no means the expert on learning design. I am just a fellow learning designer in the room with a particular interest in how we train learning designers. And today I'm coming to you from the lands of the Darug people. So I'd just like to throw in my acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land at the same time. We've already done that, so we're not going to do that. I've got 4 things that I thought would be really interesting to discuss with all of you. But I'd much rather have this as a bit of an interactive session, and generally because I think I'm up to my 4th platform this morning. I've done a Google Meet, I've done a couple of Zooms, I've done some Teams, and now I'm on Blackboard Collaborate. Generally, I like to stick to using the chat function just because it's a good starting point for interactions. And I do hope that there will be time at the end of this session for a little bit of Q&A and comments and feedback and thoughts, because we're all in the same boat together. So to kick us off, what I'd like you to do is put in the chat window what your current job role is. Yes, yeah, I'm getting good on all the different kinds of platforms. So educational developer, Danny, great. That's the kind of thing I want to hear. What else we got there? Senior educational designer, great. Lots and lots of different kinds of people talking about their kinds of things. Learning designers, senior learning designers, nice. All right. Lots and lots of different kind of roles. And we will come back to this notion of all these different kind of roles in a little bit, because I think that's part of the great challenge of being a learning designer, or being in learning design kind of fields, learning design adjacent fields. Okay, so the first thing I really want to talk about is the growth of learning design. This kind of job that has come from nowhere. I'm sure you've seen things that look a little bit like this. The hottest job in higher education, and it's certainly not even the hottest job in higher education. It's the hottest job in lots of other fields as well. And I love that phrase, the Sherpas of online learning teams. I'm not sure it's exactly politically correct, but I like this idea of guiding people as well. So in about 2020, 2021, there was a spate of articles like the one written above in both the international kind of media and within Australia as well, and within the higher education space, and also in the job market more generally. And it claimed that learning or instructional designers, howsoever defined, were the hottest jobs in town. And there was a lot of support for the claim. More and more jobs were being advertised, and organisations were making this kind of rapid shift towards more online modalities of learning. I can see that librarians have joined the conversation, which is great. I am not going to disagree. Librarians are the second best people on the face of the earth. The best people are teacher librarians. Anyway, so these job advertisements were across diverse sectors. They were in corporate and finance sectors, tertiary education. Interestingly enough, the entrepreneurial and the startup sectors were very interested in learning or instructional designers. And kind of strangely for me, coming from that background, there were calls for instructional designers and learning designers in education sectors, in primary and secondary education. Not-for-profits were very interested in learning designers at about this time. Just to give you a bit of a flavour of the range of different kinds of organisations that were trying to employ learning designers, the Cancer Council, which is a big not-profit organisation that funds cancer research and cancer support, was trying to employ learning designers. The Australian Football League, the AFL, right, wants learning designers. And that seems a bit bizarre until you realise that in the US, almost every single professional football team employs instructional or learning designers. And perhaps the most interesting one was Transport for New South Wales is employing huge numbers of learning designers in lots and lots of different capacities. So, just to give you a bit of a quantitative aspect, these are some statistics that I've plucked out of the air showing the kinds of growth that was expected in learning or instructional design roles, both in the US, Australia, and even more broadly in the US. Now, the natural thing to say at this point is, oh, Keith, come on, it's a bit of a blip in the system. It's just down to COVID and its associated effects. Everybody's rushed to be online, and I promise I will not say unprecedented in this presentation again, because I'm pretty sure we're all sick and tired of that word. But these events have necessitated such an immediate shift to the way we work. So suddenly everybody needs to be a learning designer in order to do the work that had been taken for granted before. Not only was the mix of face-to-face and online different, now we were all working online. But so too was much of the way we did our work. For example, I had 2 young children at home, and we were homeschooling, and my wife, who's a high school teacher, was at home as well. So we needed to be much, much more flexible in the way that we did our work as well. And that led to more increased asynchronous ways of working and ways of learning. Well, that might be part of the order, and it's hard to separate out the effects of COVID from everything else that's going on. I would suggest that, in fact, learning and instructional design has been rising steadily for quite a while. For example, that 11% growth in the US is actually for the decade up to and ending in 2021. So only a very small part of that is related to the COVID era. Of course, the other two are predicted growth statistics, and the one in Australia is for a decade ending in, I think, 2025, and the worldwide growth one is in 2026. So what are the other reasons for this desire to find more learning designers and to give them jobs? Besides the fact that it's good for us, I think that one of the reasons is the increasing ubiquity of mobile and digital technologies. This is part of the move towards what Theo Hug talks about. He calls it micro learning, this notion that we learn on the go all the time, and at the moment of need rather than at the moment of access. And there's also the fragmentation of the public sphere into what Zizi Papacharici talks about when she calls, we no longer have a public sphere, instead we have private publics and public privates. And what we're seeing there is the increasing difficulty of reaching a critical mass of people when we're trying to communicate with them or talk to them or teach or instruct them. In the corporate setting, there is now an expectation that workers will continue to learn throughout the whole of their career. This is kind of a follow-on from what Peter Senge used to talk about with the learning organisation. If an organisation is going to be a learning organisation and constantly adapting to these ongoing changes and the pace of change rapidly accelerating, that requires ongoing and continuous learning opportunities for staff members. And that means there's always going to be a need for people to facilitate that learning in a timely and cost-efficient way. And hence, there's always going to be a need for us as learning designers. Well, maybe and maybe not. David, I couldn't agree more. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved LinkedIn Learning. But in terms of a good learning experience, all right, let's move on. So the next thing that I want to talk about now that we've established that there's this growth, is the historical and ongoing confusion about what it means to be a learning designer. And I'm going to riff a little bit off here from a very famous paper by Ellen Wagner, who says, what is this thing called an instructional designer? And I'm just updating it a little bit and calling it, what is this thing called a learning designer? Ellen Wagner, who's currently the president of AECT, has written about the confusion expressed by her peers and her colleagues and other parents and people she meets when she introduces herself as an instructional designer. And it's certainly something that I know is true as well. You know, I remember trying to explain to my cousins that, yes, I'm a learning designer. And the only response that they all wanted to give me was, well, how's that different to being a teacher? And I'm like, well, of course it's different to being a teacher. But the finer points were lost on them. Lloyd Reiber has discussed in detail and repeatedly the differences between learning and instructional design and more broadly education, facilitation and educational technologies. There have been dozens of definitions proposed for what is a learning or an instructional designer. Generally, they lack wide appeal. And I think that's largely due to the role of a learning designer and how it's constantly being reinvented in order to fit the needs or the expectations of whoever is paying the bills. And let me show you what I mean by that. So, for example, how many of these did we get in the first little activity that I did? You know, so one way is we might think about what learning designers, however we define that, do is to examine the different terms given to learning designers. And I quite like to collect these because I think some of them are fantastic. So these are just a few that I've gathered in recent research. My personal favorite is the learning engineer. Right? Although I couldn't tell you how that might be fundamentally different to that of a learning designer. I'm sure there are people in this seminar, educational designers, for example, who might be quick to point out some key differences between their role and what learning designers in their organization do. But I would suggest that on the whole, those differences are probably more contextual than widespread. And after all, right, who doesn't want to call themselves a learning designer? I'm put in mind of one of the articles written by my colleague Camille Dixon-Dean, where she says, you know, if you've ever been a learning designer and you've had to fix someone's printer for them, then you're not really a learning designer anymore, are you? You've moved into the field of tech assistance. And I can see people talking about that exactly. Oh, Charlie, that's a new one. I'll have to add that to my list. Knowledge designer. That's a bit philosophical, isn't it? Interesting. Okay, great. The Larnaca Declaration, yes, Adrian. That's a thing that I you know well and agree with for the most part. But I wouldn't say that it's particularly widespread in the field. Would you? Another way we could look at it is to consider the what roles people come into this field from. You know, so for example, in the US and Australia, most qualifications that are related to learning designs work at a postgraduate level, so a graduate certificate or a master's program or even a PhD program. And that supports the idea that it's the kind of a career change for a lot of people. So if you spend any time on learning design forums, one of the most common questions you'll see is, I'm a middle school teacher or I'm a high school teacher and I want to become a learning designer. Can someone tell me how to do it? And that's quite common. When I was designing the graduate certificate for learning design at UTS, we did the typical kind of thing, and we created some personas and we spoke to lots of people, and we specifically tried to develop these personas that showed people pathways. And of course, one of the ones that we came up with was the tired teacher, which is a horrible phrase, you know, and I didn't like using it, but it resonated with so many of the potential students that we spoke to. You know, there are teachers who are looking for new careers, and that's a way into it. But equally, there are people from all kinds of other sectors. One of the best learning designers that I ever worked with came from an architecture background. I had no formal qualifications or even any formal education in education or in learning or in instructional or learning design. Increasingly, we see people from higher education who are working in these spaces, people from ICT backgrounds, and I'm conscious when I say ICT, that's actually a huge field. And quite rightly, people are pointing out, what about people coming from UX backgrounds into learning design? And that's an interesting space, and I agree that they should definitely be on this chart as well. So thank you for pointing that out. So that doesn't really help us work out what a learning designer does either. So let's try to approach it from a different perspective. Let's talk about what kind of skills a learning designer might need. Job advertisements, of which there are many, provide some insight into this, but they also, I think, show a bit of a disconnect between what we do as learning designers and what is expected of us by others. For example, Albert Rithout from the University of Florida has just done a bit of research into this, pointing out the great dichotomy between what's on a job advertisement for a learning designer and what they spend most of their time doing, which I think is pretty interesting. So, let's make this a little bit interesting. Yeah, absolutely. And everything in between. So I want to, and I can see people are really active in the chat window, which is great. So I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think is the second most sought after skill in learning designers? I kind of hope we'd all agree that some kind of capacity to design and develop learning or educational or training programs is the number one required skill. But what do you think is the second most required skill according to job advertisements in learning designers? Okay, some diversity. That's good. Nice. Yeah, and funnily enough, from what people are saying, yeah, these are coming up. All right, good. All right, so I'll show you the answer. There you go. It's the one I've highlighted just there. Communication and collaboration. Those human-centered skills. I just detest the phrase soft skills because I think it devalues them. But that is often something that comes up a lot in advertisements. Danny, the academic whisperer, absolutely. In higher education, it has that role, doesn't it? And there you go. So things that other people have said. There's an evaluation, there's delivery, there's project management, which I know some people have said. Increasingly and frustratingly, there's expectations about experiences with specific LMSs, which I think pushes us in that direction of being technological or technical experts rather than learning experts. But more on that as we get to that. What I'm seeing though through the research that I'm currently undertaking is an increased commonality of skills, and these are just some of them. What I'm suggesting that is perhaps a hardening of the expectations of the field. So perhaps what we're beginning to see, and I am being very modal in my delivery here, perhaps we are beginning to see a formulation of what it means to be a learning designer. This can be a good and a bad thing, I think, but it could potentially lead to increased professional standing through organisations like Ascolite, of course. But it does have the downside that it might mean less opportunities for those who don't have that bit of paper which says that they're a learning designer. And increasingly, more and more employers are seeking out evidence in the form of portfolios before employing learning designers. That's increasingly the case in the non-tertiary education sector, but I imagine it's only a matter of time until it becomes part of the tertiary education sector. And I think that has significant impacts for how we develop new learning designers as we go forward. Yeah. Lots of comments in the chat window. Do you need to have high-level skills in learning and how humans learn in order to be a learning designer? I would hope so, Jane. I would certainly hope so. But we will get to that in just a moment. All right, so let's talk about the kinds of challenges that are facing the learning design profession at the moment. Yeah, great question, Wendy. Yeah, I don't know. let's see what everyone else can say. But what I want to do is just, I don't think I can canvass in the space that Kashmir has kindly given me all of the challenges that the profession is facing. And we've already talked about a few in terms of professional recognition, which may or may not be changing. I'm certainly hopeful it is. And also, you know, just people understanding what it is that we do and being able to communicate that. However, I'm going to focus on three in particular challenges that highlight what I think are the most interesting from an academic perspective, but perhaps also the most concerning, also from someone who is a learning designer and someone who works within the profession. And the first one might take you by surprise. The shift towards blended and online modalities has meant that there's been a concomitant increase in the data available for analysis about students' learning. Kalanskis and Cope talk at length about the data exhaust trails that we are all now generating, and how we can design better learning if we can just sniff up all of these data exhaust trails, which is a pretty graphic image. Other people would disagree with that and say that this data exhaust that we generate is not good quality data, and then perhaps we're more interested in limiting the kind of data that we gather. I mean, so we can argue, and many have, like I've just suggested, about the value of the data and whether it signifies any form of learning. But we cannot, at this point, dispute the fact that learning analytics is rapidly growing in importance in education and training. The key aspect that is of interest to decision makers is that shift from that bottom left corner on the analytic column there, from descriptive and diagnostic analytics to predictive and, even more importantly, prescriptive analytics. In other words, rather than examining what happened and making some kind of claim about the reasons for that event, you know, everybody failed because they failed to study, some learning analysts have suggested that this may very well lead to being able to influence nudge-like, behavioural insight-like, specific behaviours and learning among students and other learners. So in other words, before you fail, you will be told and nudged and directed and guided in a automated or semi-automated fashion to undertake the actions that you need that will help you succeed. So in other words, it's a prospective form of analytics rather than retrospective. Of course, that's fiendishly difficult to do. Already there are lots of kinds of interventions in many modern learning management systems with increasing or decreasing levels of automation and involvement from the lecturer or the teacher. And there are various automated software tools that attempt this. For example, OnTask is one, but they're mostly, I think it's fair to say, in their infancy. It's even harder to make that link between behavior and learning, and then to ensure that that learning is transferable in the future. Yeah, absolutely. People talking about Duolingo is a simple example. And if you've noticed, Duolingo just recently released some data talking about how many people have suddenly started studying Ukrainian. So that's certainly very accessible. And I can see Jane is quite rightly identified that there'd be huge workload implications for these tasks. Absolutely. And skill level qualifications. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is saying the challenges facing learning analytics in a workable sense haven't stopped people claiming that this is the end of the learning design. After all, if you have a sufficiently sophisticated and generalizable model of learning that you can feed into an LMS, what need is there for someone to design the learning experience? Isn't it much better to simply get out of the way and let the machine make the decisions about how and when and with whom to intervene? While I'm skeptical at this point about that, and I think that skepticism is hard won in the field of educational technology, I do think that learning designers will increasingly be expected to and need to make use of data in their work. So while this is a challenge, perhaps it is also an opportunity. Stu talking about the affective aspects of a learning experience. It's a good question. I don't think it's rhetorical at all. Some learning analysts would say we can measure that. Jane, that's another great question. Would learning analytics specialists find the word of learning designers credible? I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm going to get to that in a little bit. Another thing that I want to talk to you about, another challenge that I think is possible, is presented by these new technologies. So this is perhaps the most existential threat for those of us who've been in the field for 20 years or more. Let me explain by what I mean by giving you an example. Once again, XR, or extended reality, has pride of place in the Horizon EduCourse report as an educational technology whose time has come. I say pride of place because I think it's been appearing in that position almost every single year since at least 2012, and we're not there yet. Leaving aside my natural cynicism for educational fads, I think it's important to ask, what if VR especially becomes something much more common in the next 5 years? So even me, who's hardly an early adopter, is playing around with things like the Oculus Rift these days. And I think that's an interesting challenge, especially in the VR space, because VR is fundamentally, well, the claim is that it's fundamentally different to other learning experience design work. It is in and of itself an experience generator. It doesn't approximate the experiences in order to develop learning by proxy. Rather, it develops experiences that are cognitively, psychologically, and perhaps even physiologically the same as having taken part in the real experience. And if you take a moment to think about that, I think that has profound implications for learning design. How does that mean that we now need to develop learning experiences when students are working in entirely new environments? How do principles such as reducing cognitive load apply in a virtual environment where students have so much more agency over their own learning? I'm not saying that as learning designers, we can't answer these questions. And I certainly think we're going to be at the forefront of these kinds of this kind of research in the coming years. But what I am saying is that perhaps we don't have those answers yet. And those of us in the profession perhaps need to think about how we might find the answers to those questions. The final challenge that I want to talk about comes from an unexpected source within academia. And I'm conscious that I am speaking as an academic as well as a learning designer. So I'm wearing both hats at the same time at the moment. It's perhaps only relevant to learning designers working in higher education. And I guess it's related to different approaches to improving the quality of teaching and learning in particular settings. As we all know, the Bradley report indicated that students in higher education are increasingly preferring and demanding flexible approaches to study because they're time poor, well-connected, managing diverse other responsibilities at different life stages. And I'm beginning to see this in my own classes. Even though at UTS we're encouraging students to come back to face-to-face, many students are requesting or even demanding that I provide them with a link to a hybrid learning opportunity. And part of me is like, good on them, they should have that opportunity. The other part of me is like, well, actually, that's going to require a lot more work from everybody involved. Anyway, this kind of approach has led to an increased focus on teaching and learning at universities and scholarship around what that means and what that might look like. So some universities, it's led to decentralized teaching and learning units. Others have got university-wide groups. Many universities have a bit of both. But there's also an increase in roles within these units. So not just academic communities of practice, but also professional staff. And those professional staff are often there with a responsibility to train academics, but not to facilitate the learning design itself. Learning design for academics rather than learning design for students. And, you know, this has been supported by a greater use of things like templating in LMSs and expectations around online course sites, with mixed successes, if we're being honest. There has been a fair amount of pushback from academics about this, and it concerns the increasing workload that's being expected of them. But I think it's also a challenge for us as learning designers, because if all academics become that unicorn, they're capable of designing and facilitating learning experiences as well as being subject matter experts, what role is then left for learning designers? Of course, the other side is true. Many academics would resist being pigeonholed solely as a subject matter expert. They take their teaching seriously, and many of them are very good at it. They also take their learning design seriously, and they're very good at that as well. So I think that kind of tension and the different tertiary education approaches to it is going to become a challenge for learning designers in coming years, more than it already is. So what does that mean for us as contemporary learning designers? And I've just got a couple more minutes and 3 more things to tell you, and then I'm going to finish up with this. Yeah, exactly, Jane. Like I said, the workload implications are huge. All right. Interesting comment by Hanno there. I'm not sure I agree with that. All right. So how might we as contemporary learning designers future-proof ourselves? And perhaps one way of doing that is to think about what the future of learning design training and education look like. So that's what I want to talk about just for the last couple of minutes of my presentation. And one thing that I'm thinking about is that despite what I'm seeing and calling an increasing professionalization, I think learning design is likely to be a role that will continue to be practiced or will increasingly be practiced in teams. And when I say that, I'm not talking about teams of learning designers. I'm talking about mixed methods teams, I guess you could call them. The unicorn learning designer, that person who can wrangle the subject matter experts, build the LMS, shoot and edit the videos, and then put it all together, you know, I've met a few of them and they're incredible, but it's certainly not the case for all learning designers. So instead, I suggest that learning designers will become part of much larger teams that are increasingly flexible, that manage these projects at a significant scale. They'll be flexible and dependent upon the demands of the project. And you can see our discussions about learning analytics, I've got that person in there. Some people are already talking about accessibility and inclusiveness. I've got an accessibility specialist there. Multimedia designers, UX designers, there's the subject matter expert, the learning designer, the learning analyst. I do want to point out one point here as well, though. While I anticipate the design of a course or a subject or any kind of training being a co-design process, if that's the case, I think it's important to remember that the learners are the most important stakeholders in that process. So it's important to find ways to incorporate them as well into future iterations of learning design. And I would see that as becoming essential as we go forward. So related to that idea is the notion of the T-shaped learning designer. So you're probably familiar with IDEO CEO's Tim Brown's work about this. So it describes designers more generally who has knowledge in one particular, a deep level of expertise in one area, but knowledge in a wide range of areas. So this example is from a UX perspective, but I think it's true for learning designers as well. Some of my colleagues at UTS, Lucy Blakemore and Christina Brower, have applied this to learning designers, but I think we are increasingly becoming pie-shaped learning designers as time goes on. We have 2 legs rather than one. So we often have, well, I hope we have the expertise in designing learning experiences, but as we develop in our skills, or perhaps from our previous careers, we develop, for example, multimedia design skills, or coding and programming skills, or project management skills. I would even suggest that we might go further than this and conceptualize ourselves not only with multiple areas of skill expertise, but also with a contextual expertise. So rather than TU or X-shaped learning designers, we might need a more 3-dimensional representation. So I give to you the left-hand rule of learning design. I did my undergraduate degree in engineering, and on the left-hand side you can see, I think it's Fleming's left-hand rule, which shows you the direction of the current when a force and magnetic field involved. And on the right, I've applied that to learning design, where I show that we have learning expertise, that's your pointer finger, and then your middle finger might be your other design expertise, you know, so that other leg that we were talking about. But increasingly, I think we also need to develop a context expertise. That is, we need to be able to specialize in higher education or corporate education or school-based education or not-for-profit, those kinds of things. So I'll finish up with just a final thought. If that's the current state of learning design in 2022, what does that actually mean for those of us who are entering the profession? How do we train for that? This is something that I'm particularly interested in, given that I'm the course coordinator for a graduate certificate in learning design TS. In designing that course, I wanted to provide a learning experience that encouraged transfer. That is, the ability to take what we've learned and shift it from one project to the next in as efficient way as possible. One of the unfortunate refrains about evaluations of many learning design programs is that graduates often feel unprepared for their first day on the job as a learning designer. There's an emphasis on theory in these courses, but little in the way of practical application. This is a genuine concern and one that I think can be best addressed through innovative approaches to work integrated learning. So I've been inspired in some ways by that notion of clinical placement from medical and increasingly teacher education training and what that might look like in a learning design context. The answer that I've come up with in the graduate certificate is a course-wide and course-long integration of various design elements that encourage work integrated learning. And I call these things expression sessions. There's also in conversation with learning designers. Perhaps the most important one is context-dependent assessment tasks, and of course, an internship-like experience. Taken together, I think they provide the skills that allow people to develop as learning designers and be ready to work as learning designers, regardless of the context in which they find themselves. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Keith. That was so much to absorb and so much to think about. And I'm very sure audience, they have a lot of questions, and they had a very fruitful discussion. I was looking at the chat, and I see that you also kind of touched upon the human aspect of learning design, which is bringing in students, and that is something that will just keep learning designers in job. I say it's not going to be replaced by very capable academics who knows learning design as well, because then you know how people learn and that human aspect of learning design. Now I'm opening this space for anyone who has a question, so please unmute your mic and ask your question briefly. Yes, David.
Thank you, Kashmiri, for organising this, and Keith, that was awesome. I was wondering if you'd talk about in a course I'm doing, we were talking about what skills a learning designer needs, and I said one of them is honesty and self-care. In that, I think, speaking from an academic's point of view, it's very easy for us to expect the learning designer to do exactly what we want with all shiny technologies, and also sort of set them the same sort of pattern of work that we have adopted. So I just wondered if you'd like to comment on the importance of being honest with the subject matter expert, and also being honest with yourself in terms of your workload and that work-life balance.
Yeah. Something that I say to my students all the time is good learning designers say no. That's not my job. No, I can't do that. No, that's not how, that's not something that I'm able to assist you with. Because the moment you start saying yes, you become that person, and you kind of get pigeonholed into that. And I guess it's good advice for life in general to be able to say no to things that are beyond what you're capable of doing, rather than say yes and then cause all that kind of grief. So I know workload is a significant concern in academia, but considering the way universities are increasingly, and speaking tertiary education wise here, universities are moving towards more and more short courses, short forms of learning, micro-credentials, and the demands for these to be available in multiple modalities, so blended and online. There's going to be more and more work for learning designers. And I think it's important that learning designers are adequately remunerated for that, but also that there's enough learning designers to do the work, and all the other experts as well. And that's why I think that teams-based approach is so important, rather than everything resting on the shoulders of that one learning designer.
Susan?
Oh, hi. Thanks for that presentation. I really loved that. At my institution, there seems to be a move towards not hiring educational or learning designers and expecting that the modern day academic take up this educational design work. And in the faculty that I work in, there's a School of Nursing. A lot of the academics that teach are practitioners and nurse practitioners that don't necessarily have the skills, they haven't done a grad cert or any of the formal education in, so they don't really have an understanding of constructive alignment or, those sort of things of pedagogy, and yet they're expected to do that in their jobs. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's just inefficient, isn't it? These people have been hired because they are experts in the practice of nursing or whatever, right? Not because they're experts in the capacity of learning experience design. So it annoys me at that level that we're taking highly skilled, highly trained, highly experienced people and saying, you're not good enough, now you have to be able to do this as well. Especially when there are people out there, like most of the people in this room, who are more than capable of and this is their passion, So I don't have any answers, Susan. I do have sympathy and empathy. I agree. Yeah, it's I just the unicorn academic. There are some out there who are brilliant, but it's not a workable model for everybody to be that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Oriel?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hi, Keith.
Hey, Ariel.
Hi. I've always sort of come from the position that I agree with R.C. Clarke. Any teacher that thinks they can be replaced by a computer probably should be. But on the other hand, I don't believe that all that teachers should be able to do is walk into their classroom, turn on the lights or the overhead projector or the whatever, and open the windows. So as a learning designer, I think if you say no, you have to be able to also say, yes, but I can help, I can show you how to do that and hand it over to you. So you're working with them rather than for them. So it's a no, but rather than a no, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I think that's very good. Yes, that makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you, Ariel. Yeah. And it's also, more likely to lead to a more pleasant workplace, isn't it? Yeah, and I would agree with you that, I guess one of the things that I'm not comfortable entirely about that teams-based model is the idea that facilitators are just facilitators. I don't think, we want people who just walk in, switch on the lights and start talking from the slides. I think there's got to be more to it than that. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. So yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Stu.
Hey, Keith, thanks so much for that. I actually coordinate the Certificate of Digital Learning up at UNE, so I think everything that you were saying was like, yeah, thanks so much for just saying that. Anyway, I took a long and winding road to be a lecturer. Like, I was a learning designer for a long time and actually was a casual academic teaching in design, like UX, UI, all of that stuff. And there was one thing that was coming out in that field that was basically saying, like, if you know human psychology, that was a really added skill to coming to that field. So I was curious what your thoughts are in terms of like the learning sciences and like human psychology in terms of learning design.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking, how much of that do we touch on? I've had a similar conversation with Peter Goodyear from the University of Sydney, and obviously he was instrumental in setting up the Master of Learning Sciences and their graduate certificates associated with that, which is one of the quite impressive programs that's out there. Um, I think as learning designers, we need to know educational psychology, to the point, that we're talking about things like the different theories about learning. So yeah, I think that's part of our kind of kit bag that we need to be able to draw on. And as a learning designer, as a broad featured learning designer, rather than any particular contextual specialization, I think we need to be conscious of all those different theories, because learning design for competency-based education can be quite different for learning design at tertiary levels that doesn't focus on competency-based education. So I think in terms of educational psychology, it's essential.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that's the neat thing about teaching into this area, because we've got so many people, and everybody in this room, we're all coming from different contexts. We all have different backgrounds and stuff, and that's what I always loved about being a learning designer. Thanks for that.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, David.
But I just wanted to add to what Stu said. I mean, it sometimes it scares me, because the list of expectations from learning designers gets broader and broader, and to be a good learning designer, you have to know so many things that probably is come to a point when it feels very unrealistic to expect all of this from one person. But yeah, I don't know. So David.
Keith, this is sort of going on in the chat. I just would like to comment on the idea, the issue of acknowledgement and recognition of the learning designer. So I mean, particularly like obviously in academia, we talk about co-authorship and things like that. I mean, is that what works in your industry? I mean, or does it really
Yeah.
depend? Because
No, that.
I guess as
Sorry.
academics, we need to know what's the way that we ensure you're acknowledged and when things are disseminated.
Yeah. I mean, and that's such an interesting question. This actually came up in a workshop that I was teaching not so long ago. Because in the past, traditionally, lecturers own their lecture material, right? The slides and the notes and whatever, and it's up to them what they do with it. But what happens when it's in a blended or an online modality, and there's all this asynchronous material that's been developed by someone else entirely, with input from the lecturer or the subject matter expert. And I think the only way forward is to make it that collaborative process. So why can't we normalize this idea that when you get introduced to the staff, every LMS has got the, who'll be teaching you this course, as well as the subject matter experts and the tutors. We also have the learning designers and whoever else who was involved in it. Because if they've contributed, they've got every right to it. The other thing that I think people are talking about is learning designers as project managers. And I think that is such a loaded question, because you often are the person who knows where everything's going. And so, where everything fits in and where everyone's up to. So you kind of default to that role of project manager. But quite rightly, people pointed out that project managers get paid more than learning designers. So if you're in that position, I'd say ask for more money. You're worth it. Yeah.
Danny.
Pseudo academics. Yeah. Sometimes third space. Lots of. Sorry, just while we wait for Danny, I'll just jump in really quickly. So lots of universities are now negotiating their enterprise agreements for the future. And I have heard from a couple of universities that there's a discussion about these kinds of third space professionals. And that might, the example that's often given is learning designers in that case. I don't know what that will look like or what that will mean, but it's worth keeping an eye on. Yeah.
Yeah. So if Dana is not available, Amanda?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi. I'm just wondering what your perception is on universal design and encouraging creativity and personalization.
In terms of learning design.
Yeah, how they connect.
Right. How long have you got? Creativity.
Just a brief summary.
So I teach explicitly about universal design for learning, because I think it's something that all learning designers need to be conscious of. I think it segues really nicely into broader discussions about accessibility and inclusivity. Though of course there's much more to it, and it's kind of that design element for us as learning designers. How does that relate to creativity? Yeah, creativity is hard. I've actually got a PhD student who's exploring that at the moment, and how creativity is socially and environmentally constructed. Yeah, maybe creativity in online spaces could be worth exploring. In short, I don't have an answer.
Well, that's my
Sorry.
PhD, so I'm just looking at ideas. I'm just throwing around ideas and seeing what you might think. But yeah, the universal design and then the personalization of things. So how do we make it so that everybody can contribute in their own unique ways, and we don't sort of, with a universal design, and I work with inclusion as well, so encouraging everybody to participate in ways that showcase their own strengths, sort of thing. So, and I come as a facilitator and a educator, and then integrate learning design. I'm one of the people that like to, I think it, if you can, integrating those two roles is really valuable, and I see it heading that way.
Yeah, no, I'm doing a presentation in a couple of weeks for Erica Southgate's XR in Education group. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about there, I'm meant to be talking about virtual reality and learning design in virtual reality, but I'm going to talk about maybe we're talking about the wrong thing. Instead, we should be talking about technologies that allow us to personalize that learning experience. And I think perhaps the virtual reality will allow us to have individual experiences for every single learner in the classroom. And that won't be supported by virtual reality. That will have to have some kind of machine learning AI backend that is serving up those kind of experiences. I'm a bit out of my depth talking about it, but I certainly think it's an interesting area to talk about. Yeah.
I'm very conscious. Sorry, I'm conscious about the time. I know that Adrian, you asked a question, but how about we just give a very quick chance to Sharon, and we will have to leave other questions for our group chat in the team space.
Okay, so
Sharon.
yes, so my quick question is, how do we create promotional pathways for learning designers? Because at the moment you come in as a learning designer and that's the box that you stay in. You might be able to become a manager of learning designers, but it's so few, and I'm finding that we lose so many learning designers because there is no career pathway.
Yeah. And I spoke about that tired teacher persona we created. Lots of teachers are quite horrified at the relatively poor rate of pay for even starting learning designers. So yeah, and even senior learning designers. I think we need to invent new roles and new positions and pay them appropriately, and that could possibly be related to their position within those teams that I suggested. So as you move away and from that T-shaped learning design, and maybe you develop those other kinds of areas of expertise, maybe you get recognized. So if a learning designer is working as a project manager as well, then let's pay them at that level. But what we're talking about really is restructuring that kind of professional side of universities in a way that works for workers rather than a way that saves money, which is a big conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith. I think we will have to stop here. I just wanted to let everybody know that this webinar is recorded and it will be on Learning Design Special Interest Group page later this week or maybe early next week. You will also receive the slides. Are you going to share the slides with us, Keith?
Oh, of course,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. I'll add in some references because a few people asked that.
Yeah, so I'll be putting that slides onto our team space under the webinar. Also, I will be yes, I will be also sending the links to this webinar from YouTube as well. So just stay tuned on our team space, and I'll see you in next webinar.